Welcome everyone. My name is Sean, and today we gotta update you yet again on the migrant crisis in the city of New York, yet again on migrants taking priority over everyday citizens, because a public high school in the city of New York has been shut down. The students have been told that they need to learn remote because the migrants have been moved into their school as a shelter, and as we all know, educating the next generation of citizens is subordinate to the needs, wants, and desires of people who immigrate to the United States illegally, falsely claim asylum, and don't like the shelters that they're in when the rain starts coming down. Now, we're going to get into this, but before we do, thank you to everybody for 300,000 subscribers. I really appreciate it. Little did I know when I started this channel in the long ago that I would reach this iconic threshold, and I can only thank you guys out there in the audience for watching, subscribing, and all of that over all of these years. I have the coolest job in the world due to the fact that I have you guys out there in the audience, so I appreciate it. Obviously, thank you to the members on actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money, okay?
And the podcast listeners, Spotify, Apple, and Google's podcasting platform. Now, I hate recaps, but we have a lot of new people here, and even though I have longer videos that go into this in greater detail that you can look at in my backlog, let me just run through the basics for you so you can understand how we got here. New York City, sanctuary city. Been a sanctuary city for a very long time. Then, in 2016, the evil orange man was elected president. He ran on being tough on the border, so we actually added additional sanctuary city protections under the Bill de Blasio administration. However, all of this was a virtue signal. New York City is nowhere near the southern border, but when Biden took office and he promised to let migrants surge to the southern border because they were just committing asylum, all of a sudden the problem grew in such a way that we had never seen it before. Then Texas Governor Greg Abbott decided that it wasn't going to be his problem since immigration is a national issue. The problem should be felt nationally, and he started sending migrants to places like New York City, like Chicago, that said they wanted migrants, that said they were sanctuary cities or sanctuary states, and this is how we ended up with migrants all over the place in the city of New York. Well, guess what? These migrants have been sheltered, and one of the shelters that they were put up in, which was put up in Floyd Bennett Field due to the fact that all of the shelters are at capacity. Now, this has been a disaster for your average everyday New Yorker. We talked about how poor New Yorkers got shortchanged on Thanksgiving turkeys this past Thanksgiving due to the fact that the migrants lined up before them and they were able to get this stuff. We talked about how homeless people aren't able to go into shelters when there's severe weather because the migrants lined up before them and they ended up getting into those positions. Well, now it is affecting the students at a high school in Brooklyn because the city of New York, in their infinite wisdom, has decided that Floyd Bennett Field is not good enough for the migrants when the weather gets bad, so the migrants are being relocated into a high school, and the high school students are being told to pound sand, go learn remotely, because migrants take precedent over average everyday American citizens.
Well, hi there, Chris and Mary. Yeah, that's right. Parents, teachers, students say it took them by surprise when they got word yesterday that these 500 families would be transferred here to their high school to stay overnight. That means students, as you just mentioned, are indeed remote today. And some parents have expressed to us off camera here their frustration, but the mayor said they did this out of an abundance of caution. And that's because you can see in this video here, these tents, they are giant 7 tents on Floyd Bennett Field. So obviously there is concern about winds. The high winds could damage them, officials say.
Now, to be clear, for those of you who are unaware of the weather in the Northeast, of the weather in New York City, it has been windy, it has been rainy here, it has gotten a little bit of cold. We saw some flecks of snow, but mostly we're dealing with rain and high winds, but it's not been nearly as bad as it could have been in terms of previous years of winter in the city of New York, which would beg the question, if you're going to build a shelter in Floyd Bennett Field that can't even stand the mild weather that we've experienced this weekend, then what the hell did you spend that money on if it's not to adjust to the weather that is normally worse in the city of New York this time of year than what we're actually experiencing? This is clearly and obviously a policy failure, not just with the city, but with the state of New York, that they didn't build these tents to be suitable to the weather that we would normally expect this time of year. So much so that out of an abundance of caution, we have to move all of the migrants from this facility to a high school because we don't believe that that facility is suitable for the migrants who, of course, have God-tier rights that supersedes your child's need for an education in the city of New York.
They didn't anticipate there would be flooding, but they did relocate these migrants as a precaution due to these forecasted wind gusts. Our First Alert weather team says so far in Brooklyn, wind gusts have gotten up to 45 miles per hour.
Now, look, I know I got a lot of people out there in my audience, especially you Floridians, especially you Louisianans, especially you Midwesterners out there in tornado country that are saying 45-mile-per-hour winds, that's nothing. If you're a Floridian, then you went out and wrestled a gator in a Category 5 hurricane the last time there was one hanging around, and you were totally fine. How come these migrants can't stand up to 45-degree winds in the city of New York? But to be clear, this is kind of unusual in the city of New York. I do feel like every year we have strong winds, but this would be something that you would prepare for when you're building a shelter, even though they built the shelter in a bit of haste due to the fact that we got flooded with migrants in the city of New York. And by the way, when I say flooded with migrants, like flooded with the illegal aliens like New York City had, I say that fully understanding that it is flooded in comparison to what we've experienced in the past in the city of New York, not what has been experienced by border states for years, by the small towns on the border, some of which actually have twice as many illegal migrants passing through or requiring shelter as they do citizens in those particular areas. But still, you should have had something prepared, and getting rid of these kids' ability to have an education does not seem like an adequate trade-off in order to protect our precious migrants who broke our asylum laws in order to come here and are currently in the act of committing asylum fraud.
We're still waiting to hear back from emergency management as to whether these tents were indeed impacted anyway. They say engineers check them after every storm. Meanwhile, migrants at other tent shelters did not need to relocate because of their locations, and tents were set up and structured differently.
Now, the local news segment goes on to say that the migrants needed to be moved because of the historic nature of Floyd Bennett Field, not allowing them to secure the tents in the ways that they were secured in other places. They talk about how the tents need stakes in the ground, which is something any camper would know, but that's actually not something that you're able to do at Floyd Bennett Field because Floyd Bennett Field is considered a historical site, which again begs the question, why would you put the migrants there in the first place if you knew that you could not protect them from weather more than the other places where you set up these tent cities for migrants? And again, you end up with the consequence of kids being pushed out of school and no clear timeline on when these kids are able to return to school.
Now, the city's controller, Brad Lander, also expressed concerns about placing asylum seekers in Floyd Bennett Field in the first place with known storm risks and cost of moving migrants time and time again as more severe weather is expected throughout the winter. Now, as for when migrants will leave the high school here, we have reached out to city officials and we are still waiting on that timeline.
Now, for me, this is a clear example of incompetence from the mayor's office, incompetence from the governor's office, and to be perfectly fair to both of those offices and their office holders, it also goes to show you what a crisis actually living up to your sanctuary city policies can be when they're actually put to the test. So they probably knew some of the risks, some of the problems with this particular location, but ended up deciding to go with it anyway due to the fact that there was nowhere really to put these migrants other than at these locations. But one of the things that I think is indicative of the special treatment that these migrants are getting is the fact that James Madison High School in Midwood, Brooklyn is not a very good school. In fact, there are often issues with violence at this school, and that is one of the reasons why that your students that actually go there, that are largely American citizens, or at least here legally, end up having to go through metal detectors just to get to their classes. They have to line up outside in the weather in order to do so, but guess what? The migrants are actually seen on video entering the school, going past the security. The regular, normal, ordinary protocols they appear to be exempt from, which to me is a bit absurd, because if you don't want the children's bringing in weapons into the school, it should make sense to have that same level of scrutiny for people who come to this country illegally, especially when we started to see violence break out at various migrant sites between migrants over petty, stupid issues.
Todos están juntos, van por el mismo lado de la familia. Trate de mantener los nenes enfrente de usted para que sepa qué es lo que quiere.
Now look, that is just a small indication of the priority treatment, of the special treatment that the migrants get in comparison to the American citizen. But one of the things that I think is also devastating is the fact that we now know, based on the fact that a bunch of liberal places like New York City shut down their schools for far too long, that virtual learning may as well not be learning at all. And yet these students who are paying, or at least have family members that are paying taxes in order to have an education that I'm paying for as a New York City taxpayer, are getting an inferior product due in large part to the fact that their educational rights are being subordinated to the needs of the migrants, being subordinated to the needs of people who are committing asylum fraud, being subordinated to people who are in fact lawbreakers. It is an absolute shame on our nation. This idea that we need to take care of the whole world's population, including the fraudsters in the world, over our own population is not better exemplified by anything but this.
But the mayor said they did this out of an abundance of caution. Officials say they didn't anticipate there would be flooding, but they did relocate these migrants as a precaution.
We're worried about the potential for wind damaging the tents of these migrants. Well, guess what? That concern alone is going to make us move your kids out of high school, tell them to go learn remote, have them endure that loss of education, just because we cannot bear the thought of even being concerned about potential harm to the tents that the migrants are staying in this shelter that we erected on the taxpayer dime in the first place. It's not like any of these tents blew away. It's not like any of these tents were actually damaged. This is all based on the prospect that there might be some damage, that they might blow away, that there might be an issue, and that prospect supersedes the known harm that we know will come to these high school students from not being in school. But hey, that's just my thought. That's just my perspective. I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. Do kids need their educational rights to be subordinated to the whims of migrants? Is the fact that the wind might blow away one or two of those tents more important than your average everyday American citizen? And what do you think about the fact that security protocols don't appear to apply to the migrants in the same way that they do to everyday citizens? Let me know all your thoughts down in the comments below. As usual, if you like this video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on my social medias, support me via the support links in the description of this video. Thank you so much for 300K. Till next time.